Hi, everyone. Welcome to season 13 of Drink It In, the podcast, The Chosen Path. So I want to introduce Nomi, or better yet, Nomi's going to introduce herself. Nomi and I got to be a little friendly. We bumped into each other in Jerusalem a few times. We had a mutual friend that said definitely meet her. And then my daughter had her as a guest speaker in her seminary last year. And I think everyone's just going to be enthralled with your unique story. So take it away, Nomi. Tell us anything you want about you, and then lead into a little bit that Judaism spark, where it came from.
Okay, wow. Okay, so hi, everybody. My name is Nomi. Professionally, I'm a board-certified clinical nutritionist. I'm pursuing my doctorate in clinical nutrition right now. I have a private practice. I love lecturing, teaching on nutrition, not because I love the whole wellness and diet culture, but because I love good energy. And I think that nutrition is a great tool for helping people to really have great energy and show up to their tafkid in life. And let's see what else. On the personal side, I'm a mother of 4 boys, and my husband is traveling right now as I'm kind of like going through like what he's been traveling for quite a bit. And we've lived here in Israel now for the last, we're on our 20th year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you.
We've been here since we're starting our 20th year, and we really moved here not knowing we were going to stay, but it's the best decision that we ever made. And even with my husband traveling, it's felt like a lot this week. I'm, just being present with that. It's really still the best decision that we've made to like be here and to make the center of our lives here in Israel.
Wow. So why don't you share with us where you were born, where have you been in the world, and then how did you get into Judaism?
So first of all, I love that you're highlighting. I think it's so important. I think it's important to highlight conversion stories, because I think that, first of all, just going back, and I'll start at the very beginning in a moment, but when I converted, some of the advice that I was given was make sure, you can blend in. So make sure that you do that. Like don't go by your English name, which was Jessica. And, don't kind of tell people about your background. If they ask, keep it vague. I was like really given kind of this advice to really try to blend in. And at the time, I was young. I was 22 when I finished my conversion. And I'm a pretty easygoing person, and I just kind of go along with, what I didn't really challenge it. But what I realized is that it led me to be very, almost like ashamed that I had converted, like that I wasn't born Jewish, and that it wasn't something I should talk about, my conversion. And it's, having a life before. I had a very adventurous life before, not the typical Beis Yaakov life. And I felt like, wow, this doesn't fit in. I don't fit in as me. And so it's been a big thing now to come out and be able to talk about what brought me here, because I really believe that everything about you, about your story, your quirks, the good things, the bad things are all part of a set of tools that you're given, and you have to learn how to use them appropriately. And so I just love that you're, featuring different stories, because I think it just gives a different voice in the community that we don't hear so much of.
Right. And I think I totally agree with you. I can't take full credit. It was really my husband. We were at somebody's house for Rosh Hashanah, and there was a convert there. And my husband said to me, that should be your next season. You should really highlight, especially in today's day and age with everything that was going on since October 7th, and this reawakening or this reigniting or activation, whatever words you've been hearing, those buzzwords all over the social media. I think it's in our community, it's really beautiful to shine a light on people who are coming from outside the community and see the beauty of our community and why they wanted to join and why they want to be a part of it. It's like FOMO, like, you're in you're not at the party, and why does somebody else want to be at that party? What's going on at that party? And I think it just enhances a person who's in the community originally, their view on things. Wow, if they see it like that, maybe I should take another look and really see it in such a positive, warm, inviting lens. So I'm so glad I did this season. Totally glad. So you go for it, Nomi. You share your story. Go ahead.
It's a long story. The story has so many layers, and I do a lot of public speaking, and it's, to compress it into like 45 minutes, into an hour, there's so much, but just to sort of give you like a brief overview. So I was born child of the 80s, to my mother, who was an immigrant from Korea, and my father, who was born in England but raised in the States. And they had met in the States. I was born less than a year later. My brother was born. When I was 2, my mother passed away. And my father made a decision to put us into foster care. And we were there until I was 4.5. And then we were adopted by a wonderful family, Midwestern Minnesota. I had this really idyllic Midwestern childhood with, going to the park and riding my bike around the neighborhood and like playing in the stream at the park from my house. Being adopted is always it's a unique story in and of itself, the way you blend 2 families. And the great thing was that I had my parents on both sides of the family, super accepting. I grew up with lots of cousins and aunts and uncles and family vacations and just this really great childhood. I would say that probably in adolescence is when, looking back on it, I just sort of got a little bit, I would say, I guess it's rebellious, right? Like that's what, teenagers go through. And it was definitely related to what I'd gone through. It was related to adolescence as well. And I started having a really hard time. And I ended up actually moving out right before college when I was 17, moving out of my parents' house and in with a good friend's family, a friend of mine that I went to school with, and she was Jewish. And I moved in before Rosh Hashanah, and I started learning all of these different customs that I'd never seen. I grew up with Jewish friends. I even had a few Israeli girls in my class. I remember everybody going on the 9th grade trip to Israel, but I didn't really know what Judaism looked like from the inside. And so finally I'm living with this family, and the grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and she would come over and light Shabbos candles, and they would do a Friday night meal, and they weren't Orthodox. The mother actually herself wasn't born Jewish, and I think they were Reform, but it was really like my first exposure to Judaism from the inside. And it was at a time also when I was really vulnerable and needed that support. And this family was just like a good, supportive family. And I was there for not so long, and I went to college, and I don't think I realized how much of an impression it made on me until while I was in college, I actually got scouted as a model and was sent to Asia. So when I was there, I got interested in yoga. I started studying under a Swami. I thought, I'm going to go to Thailand, and there's like this big statue, and you release these doves. I'm going to go do that. I was definitely seeking spirituality. I think, also growing up, I had grown up, my adopted family is Catholic. And so I grew up regularly going to mass. I grew up with prayer. I grew up with this idea that we belong to something bigger than ourselves, a spiritual thing that's bigger than ourselves. And I wanted access to that idea. And so once I was living there out in my own in Hong Kong, I really started kind of exploring. And one of the things that I started doing was reading books. And I remember reading a book by Elie Wiesel, and I actually don't even remember which one it was, but it really moved me. And then I read a book on Shabbos, and I really loved this idea of Shabbos. At this same time, I had met who becomes my husband, a guy who was just a friend, and we were friends for quite a few months. And I remember at some point, saying to him, like, someday I'm going to convert, because I knew he was Jewish. And I remember his response was like incredulous, because he had grown up Sephardi, and he had even though he wasn't super Orthodox, he had this feeling like, well, this is like a feeling deep inside of me. I don't get how you can kind of like adopt that feeling. And even if you can get the identity. And I just remember thinking, like, when I said that, thinking, first of all, did I sound like a desperate girl? Like, I was so not trying to come off as like I'm hitting on you. But I was like, I remember just feeling like, wow, it's so interesting. Like, I'm so surprised that popped out of my mouth. But there was definitely something that drew me to Judaism. And after a while, I started actually dating my husband, and I went to the shul, and I got close with the rabbi there. And the rabbi did me a really big favor. And he said, I said, I'm interested in conversion. And I would say that this is something I think is so important for anybody considering conversion. He actually said to me, he says, you could convert here in Hong Kong. Like, it's possible. But if you really want to know what it's like to be Jewish, you have to go to a community. And he recommended that I either go to Los Angeles or New York. So I'm a model, so I picked Los Angeles. Fine, maybe I can get some acting jobs. I did a lot of like television commercials. Maybe I'll still be able to pay my bills. And that was like a really good guidance, because I think had I stayed in Hong Kong, I wouldn't have gotten like the exposure and depth and integration that I was able to get by living in Los Angeles. And so I moved, I literally didn't even tell my agency, because I'm like, they're going to think I'm crazy. I picked up, I moved, I closed my apartment, I shut down my phone. I closed my bank account. I just like flew, I went to Los Angeles, and I was still keeping in touch with my boyfriend, who was my husband, not yet my husband. And he was kind of flying back and forth. And I became more religious while living in Los Angeles and going through this conversion process. And he was coming back and forth. And every 3 months, I'd come back and I'd be like another level of religion. And he was like, I don't remember this the last time, but okay. Look, like I'm wearing nylons. Like I was, really living within a yeshivish community and sort of integrating there. But, I'll say like there were some key things when I reflect back on my conversion that were very helpful and very maybe like not helpful. So one of the things was I used to go to different families for Shabbos. When I finally decided that I didn't want to pursue the acting or modeling world at all, and that I really wanted to commit to my conversion, which I always feel like every convert, like I don't think we ever really know what we're getting into, and we're sort of like feeling it out as we go along. So when I initially considered conversion when I was living in Hong Kong, my goal was like, Shabbos is cool. Kosher, I get that. I'm a vegetarian. I'm not any longer, but I was then. No problem. I can manage that. But as I learned more and more, like you just want to do it all. You just want to do all of it. And it's funny because your podcast is called Drink It In. And I have this friend who always says like, when you become religious, you just drink it in. Like you take it all. You're like, give me more, just give me more. And that's how I felt. But I had some really good positive experiences. And one of them was like, once I decided that I didn't want to pursue acting and modeling, was that I was at somebody's house after Shabbos. I'd eaten maybe shalashudas there. And he said to me, what are you doing on Monday? I said, I don't know. Like, I'm actually kind of looking for a job. He says, well, why don't you come and work for me for 2 weeks? I ended up working for that family for 1.5 years. And they were a wonderful family. I'm still close with them today. And they really played a very important role in just like being supportive and, giving me guidance. And I think that's really important during the conversion process, because as a convert, you're kind of on an island in some ways, right? Like you kind of left your old ways. Your family thinks you're a little bit like, hello, what's going on with you over there? You're not yet fully accepted. And you feel that lack of acceptance. Like as many times as I was accepted, I can also say I felt as there's probably maybe not as many, but there's a good amount of times I felt unaccepted. And there was definitely experiences that were, made me feel very sensitive to the fact that I hadn't finished my conversion or that I did convert. But it was really amazing how people from the community, and this particular person that gave me this job, he's a really respectable member of the community. And I felt like it just gave me a little bit of like what to stand on, and that I wasn't like this newbie who was coming in and everybody was looking like, who's this girl? And she's converting. And I heard she's dating that guy. It's a very sensitive kind of time. So I think that a lot of times with conversion, there's this sort of feeling of being alone. And for me in particular, because I was adopted, because I also wasn't raised with the Korean culture, I was raised in a very different culture than what my mother was raised in South Korea. And I didn't really know a lot about my history. And then I'm moving on to this whole other religion, and I don't even have like a Masorah. I don't even know what to stand on. I'm just like taking this halacha and that halacha, and I'm doing my best, and you're doing it all. And I think that to have people that can give you guidance, I really appreciated like that kind of support that I got, for people to kind of like remind me like who I was in the process. Because I think it's almost really easy when you're converting to give it all up and just kind of become like this new person. But there's still really essential parts of you that you have to come out and use. Like there's a reason that you grew up like this and you did this, because it's part of how you're going to accomplish your tafkid. And for me, a big, huge part, I would say, of almost like the first 15 years of my marriage, of being religious, was trying to blend in and look as much like the next frum girl and not stand out. Like my goal was to be able to like walk into any frummy environment and not get the one up and down, and not get the, okay, so what's your maiden name? Like where you're like, my maiden name is Spain, like the country. Like it's, okay, if you translate it, it's Sephard. There, now it's Hebrew. I did it. So yeah, I think that, I spent a lot of time in this first 15 years. Like I say, like 0 to 20 for me as a human was my gestational age. Okay. 20 to 40 was me growing up and like adolescence. And like 40 to 60, like this is like my period, like 40 to 80, ad me'ah v'esrim, God willing. Like, but I really think that when you convert and you leave everything behind, even after you convert, you still go through kind of a growing up period that, within that new culture and that new spirituality.
I'm curious about something. You're talking about being accepted within the Jewish community and how you grew from that, not searching for that anymore, but that was something that you wanted to blend in. But when you started, you spoke about your brother, and you both were adopted together, very close in age.
Yes, we're adopted.
What is his take on all of this? Especially, I would assume the two of you have very strong bonds, being that you were both in foster care together, then adopted together, and then it's like I would think it's as if it's like the two of you against the world. I would assume the way you're painting it a little bit that he was your person probably for a very long time.
I don't know if he would want me to say this because he's obviously an adult, but on some levels, when you are the older sibling in foster care and adoption,
right,
the sibling that's under you is on some level like your kid. There's a responsibility from a very young age. Where is he? In fact, when I think back, I do have memories of foster care, even though I was quite young, and they were probably towards the end. I actually, most of my memories, I think, involve things that happened to my brother, not to me. Mm-hmm. I remember things that specifically, happened to him. And I think that it's because he was so much he was my person from, for that part for forever. It's funny because I said to him after I did this other interview, there were so many questions. And I told my brother, I was like, let's do a live together. My brother's like, no, I'm the mysterious brother. I'll stay that way. So I would actually say my brother took a similar path. My brother he teaches at a university. He's a philosopher, like a proper philosopher, studying the meaning of life. And I think that that's what emerges from childhood trauma is a search for meaning, or any trauma, perhaps, not just childhood trauma, but you search for meaning and explanation because the feelings are so much bigger than your vocabulary can ever really give you. But at least if you can understand parts of it, there's a chance that you can do something productive with it. And so for me, my search for meaning was that what happened was part of a bigger plan that Hashem had. And the plan's working as far as I'm concerned. I'm going along with it. And for my brother, it was, really taking that time to deeply reflect on another level. My brother's ridiculously smart. He's one of the most intelligent, articulate people that I know. And he's taken that to that level, and he loves it also. He's great at what he does.
And how is he when it comes to the Judaism? Was he like, are you crazy, Nomi? What are you doing?
The truth is I was so young when I started. I think it's also interesting because I would say, any 17 to 20-year-old, I made quite a few silly decisions. And then somehow when I was 20, 21, around there, 20, I honed in on a decision that really gave my life not just purpose, but a path. And so my brother was also very young, but he also was really supportive. It happens to be that he, she's still a good friend of ours. One of his closest people in his life through high school was Jewish. And so it wasn't foreign to him. We grew up in a community where there's a Reform and conservative Jewish community. And so we always had Jewish friends. And so it wasn't foreign to him. I will say that when I got married, and this is another thing that I have a lot of Hakar Satov to the LA people for, was that my wedding, I did not want a wedding because I didn't know how to dance with other women. Okay. I didn't know how the mechitza thing was going to go down with my family. I didn't want to be the center of attention and do the bedekin and the this and the that. And it was just very overwhelming. I remember being I just want to elope, and mostly to avoid dancing. Cause I was I don't know how to dance in a club. I do not do this Jewish dancing. I don't know any of the fancy footwork. I don't know how to dance in a circle. I'm not sure what's going on. At my wedding, I remember people from the community, taking my dad and pulling him into the dancing, or taking my mom and making my parents such a part of the wedding, not letting them sit on the side and watch all of that's going on. And that's such an important thing because it's such a delicate space, the convert and their family. And that relationship, even if it's strong, is still going to suffer a little bit under all of these new things. All of a sudden I can't eat in my parents' house, or I can eat, but I have to make all of these different, I'm koshering the microwave. It's Shabbos. I'm turning off the light in the fridge. My dad will open up the fridge. It's this again, like it's Shabbos, like we kind of joke about it, like, oh, sorry, but my parents were always super accommodating, but it's still fragile because there's change and transition, and any relationship is going to suffer a little bit or get challenged, not suffer, challenge a little bit, get challenged when there's transition and change and transformation. And so I really appreciate, and I think for anybody who knows somebody going through conversion, or if you're ever happen to be at a wedding or a simcha, just like making people feel included. Like there's such a sensitivity there, even if the person looks so confident, even if the person who's converted looks so confident. And it's so important to help them, to make them feel integrated and to make them feel part of the community.
It's interesting that you say that. I think that's a great lesson for anyone who is listening to this right now. It's true for all aspects. Like if there's a step parent, that's very important, because these step parents are always pushed to the side at a simcha. They're not seen as important when they very often have a very important role in the person's life who we're celebrating. So anytime to be mindful of those people around, the grandparents, that's also very important. So I like that you're bringing it to the forefront. Thank you. Would you say there's a difference between the LA community and the community in Israel getting into and being accepted within them and feeling a sense of comfort? Like, I don't know where you had kids, if you only had kids in Israel or if you had any kids in LA, I don't know.
Israel. I moved to Israel 5 months after my wedding. So we were here at the beginning of our marriage. The truth is, I will have to say I moved on the advice of somebody, also another person. We were actually going to move to a more conventional Haredi community, because when you do your conversion, when you finish, you're like pretty yeshivish. A lot of people are, I think. And I came out very, very yeshivish. And so we were actually going to move to one community. And I'm really happy that my friend's father, who didn't even really know me well, but said, I think you should move to Rehavia. And it's like, okay, let's check it out. And then it happened to be that when we were on our way to Israel, we were spending a few months at my husband's office in Hong Kong. And I ran into somebody who lived in Rehavia, like at the JCC, at the community center. So she said, oh yeah, I live in Rehavia. It's a nice community. Here's my real estate agent's number. So when we got off the plane, we went and looked at this other more Haredi community. And honestly, I can honestly say that if we had moved there, I think either we would have moved back. That's one option. Or I think that I would have pushed myself into a box so much that I think the anxiety and stress of trying to fit in would have been very hard on my marriage and kids. So I'm really grateful that I actually moved to a community where you get to be what you want. Like everybody is accepting. We have community events and everybody looks a little bit different. It's not a very homogenized community.
That's great. That's great. Now, a lot of the conversion stories that I've been hearing, everyone had a different experience at the mikvah. When you had to go to the mikvah that first time, what was going through your mind beforehand? What was the experience like while it's happening? Whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
So it's interesting because I've actually spoken about this experience a few times. The person that taught me for conversions, I was very close with her, and she became like a big sister aunt type person in my life. And I remember when she also taught me my Kala classes. But I remember when she was teaching me before my conversion, she kept saying, when you're at the mikvah, you have to daven, you just have to daven, you have to ask Hashem, it's such an auspicious time. And actually, when I got in the mikvah and I wanted to daven, and my head had no davening in it, all I could hear was, and really it wasn't even hearing, it was this feeling of immense love for Hashem. And I have to say that even now when I say it, I get a chill, because I don't know if I would have had that experience if I was born religious. I don't know if I, born into a very traditional lifestyle. But at that moment, that choosing and having gotten to that moment, the level of gratitude was the only thing that I could hear. And it's interesting because, there's the halachas of conversion, that it's a kosher conversion. But at the end of the day, the convert is the only person who knows what went on between her or him and Hashem. And I feel so grateful that actually I couldn't ask for anything at that moment, because I didn't convert on the pretense that I was wanting something in return for my conversion. And I was converting really because I wanted to just be connected to Hashem. And I was so grateful to be in that moment. And that was all I could think and feel, was that connection. And I think that I don't know if I haven't had a lot of experiences of that level of intensity. I have maybe had a few others. I'll say that I'm lucky, but it's a feeling that really, I think, has anchored my connection always.
Wow. Now, did they ask you any questions at that point in time by the mikveh, or it was just you experiencing?
The water was cold. It was,
Because some of the people interviewed said that they had asked them like the last few questions before it becomes official.
I actually remember that when I went for my like final oral exam, where they asked you like a bunch of different halachas and see like how well you studied. I mean, I would need one of the Rebbeim who was sitting on my beis din to confirm this, but I remember saying that they were extremely impressed, like with my level of. So I was like, they didn't ask me any more questions. I think I did a good job at the oral exam.
So is it just oral? Is it written? What is it like?
There was an oral exam, oral questioning, where basically you're sitting with 3 dayanim and they're like just firing questions at you about like halachas. And actually, at this point, my boyfriend we got engaged. And so I asked, could he come to be my support at this exam? And I actually remember he had the gall while they're shooting halachas at me to ask me the bracha for an avocado. Like, what was the question? And I just remember looking at him like, and I told him the bracha. I was like, but I just remember like, it was funny because I think that he knew I knew everything. He'd seen me studying. He'd seen me working so hard. He knew the life that I was living at that point. I will say this, and I think overall, I've had an extremely positive experience. I found that the beis din was really respectful. I did have one experience where I was learning with somebody at the very beginning of my conversion process, and I was open about the fact that I was dating somebody that was Jewish. And she was not so nice. And it got to the point where another time, a community member, like this is just people looking out, like I mentioned to somebody like things that she had said to me. And they said, I don't think the way she's speaking to you is so nice. And I want you to write it down. And I want you to ask for a meeting with the beis din, because I think you should maybe have a tutor that's a bit more supportive. And I went to the beis din. I remember like reading this list of like the things that she had said. Today, I can't recall them all. I think, people go through things in their lives and it comes out on the other side and you just happen to be at the receiving end of it. But I remember like crying, and the beis din, they listened. And then afterwards, one of the Rebbeim came over and said, I'm really sorry you had to go through this. I hope you understand, like, this has nothing to do with you. And I really just appreciated that. I felt like they were very sensitive and they weren't dismissive. And I also really appreciate the community member who I honestly would have just put up with anything at that point, because I was really goal focused. And so I think that I'm lucky. I remember at one point being concerned that I was losing like friends, because I was having a hard time maintaining friendships when I transitioned over to kosher and keeping Shabbos. And I remember my tutor, her name is Elizabeth Kraft. Shout out to Elizabeth. She actually said to me, she's like, don't worry, Hashem is going to give you even better friends and many, many more. And honestly, I can say that the people that I connected with afterwards, like I've had so many supportive relationships, and I'm really grateful for that. And the truth is, I don't know if every convert has that experience, because I've definitely talked to people who feel more isolated, like they haven't integrated into the community. And I hope that we as a community can really support that integration, because they're part of us. Our kids are going to be with their kids. Like this is, and they do need that support, even if they seem really confident.
But what was your husband thinking throughout this whole process? Because you had said that he wasn't as observant, and then he comes visits you in LA, and every 3 months you're like,
yeah. So about, I would say like maybe 3 months before I finished my conversion, my brother was actually going to France for a study abroad program. And so we were trying to figure out, like, when am I getting married? Because, like, of course, I had to have my brother at my wedding. Like, the beis din, I told the beis, like, there's no way I can't. So we actually got engaged maybe like 2 months before I finished my conversion. I can't remember, 3 months. Like it was like my engagement was short. It was a very short period. And that was a hard time because listen, we're planning an Orthodox wedding. We've got mechitzas and separate dancing and Jewish music and like minhagim that as a Sephardi, it wasn't even like a religious thing. It was just like, I was like living in this yeshivish community and I'm like, but I want this minhag. And he was like, but we don't do that in my family, you know? And like, so trying to compromise around that. We actually really had a hard time seeing eye to eye during that period. And the Rebbitzin and rabbi that I was close with recommended that we go to premarital counseling to like talk things out. So we went to like this very well-recognized marriage counselor, doctorate, wrote books, all of this, the Orthodox guy. And he says, listen, marriage is about compromise. And, you know, so you guys are gonna have to learn how to compromise over these hashkafic issues. And I heard him, I said, okay. He says, so I want you to write down each of you 5 things you're willing to compromise on and then come back to the next session and let's talk it out. I left that meeting and I was like, no, I'm not compromising. We're not married yet. In marriage, no problem. I will compromise. I am a team player. This is a team sport. I am here for us. I'm here for this. But at that point, I had very much completely transformed my life. I knew what level of spirituality I wanted. I knew what kind of home I wanted. And I wasn't willing to give that up after all of the changes I've made. And my husband thinks, you know, he was like, I want those things too, but I also have to do them at my pace. Mm-hmm. So he'd been living in Hong Kong and traveling back and forth. So I can see that it was like, and I'm living immersed in this environment and being supported and like going to shiurim and like going to Hebrew class. It was different for him. We were going at our own paces. The one thing that greatly accelerated everything and kind of put us on the same level was moving to Israel. Because all of a sudden we were living in this community where we were this young, newly married couple. And it kind of allowed us to like have this nice start together.
And where's he from originally?
Montreal.
Ah, okay. So they're quite traditional in Montreal.
Yeah, Sephardi traditional is, yeah, his mother Shomer Shabbos. Like they grew up, you know, when you grow up going to an Orthodox shul, it's a very, you know, traditional Sephardi lifestyle.
Wow. Okay. So you gave the advice. I love the advice that you gave for converts to be. What would you say is your favorite experience now, besides the mikvah? Because that sounded awesome. Well, from being Jewish, is there a holiday that like really resonates with you, or some sort of other experience you could share that you're like, oh, this was, you know, you look at it and you're like, I made the right decision. This is great. This is it.
Honestly, every Shabbos morning, like specifically Shabbos morning, when I wake up and like I have this just whole full, not full in terms of stuff, but just like shalom, this day that just like feels so good in front of me, like nothing on my schedule. I'm with myself. I'm with my kids. I get to be like hanging out in my pajamas. I get to like, you know, like the things that I just like feel so nurtured by. I love Shabbos. And I honestly have this experience of like every Shabbos, like I just love Shabbos. I just love it. And it's funny because like I like my Friday candles. I'm like, okay, great. Thank God it's Shabbos. I feel it intensely Shabbos morning when I am not waking up to the rush of the week, when I am with my energy, when I'm with a different spiritual energy. I am not meeting the demands of everything around me. There's no traffic. There's no honking from the school bus that my kid has to get on the school bus at this minute. It's such a pleasant experience. And I think it's what keeps me sane, high functioning, and overachieving the other days of the week.
Wow. Now, how did your kids get into this? Do they talk to you about like, what was your life like beforehand, Ima, mommy? And, you know, do you have those types of discussions with them?
So my mom, adopted mother, my mother, she is a fantastic collage photo maker. Like she makes me these gigantic books of like hundreds and hundreds of photos. So my kids have seen every stage. They've seen my permed hair when I was 6 years old. They've seen every Halloween costume I've ever been in. They've seen me with Santa Claus. They've seen modeling pictures from when I first started modeling for Target and Marshall Fields when I was in college. They've seen pictures of my friends, my cousins, everything. My kids, I would say that initially when my oldest son, who's now he's 18, when he was young, I was so like nervous about being different and that shame of sort of like not having been born into this and not being the perfect Beis Yaakov girl my whole life, that I really like didn't say much to him, but we were always going to my parents' house. Like my parents, we spent summers at my parents' house. Like every summer. I'd go there, do my kosher food. My parents would go find everything with OU on it. So it was always like, they knew that grandma and grandpa, like, were not Jewish, but my parents, even like, they have a Christmas tree, they hang a happy Hanukkah sign on it. And so, like, you know, but my kids, like, they're pretty, you know, they know it. I definitely didn't talk about it. I didn't really talk about it. Like, you know, it's just there, you know?
Right.
The one thing that happened in the last 2 years, which was like a big, huge thing, and I talk about this on some of the other places that I've spoken, was that I actually did a genetic test and I found my mother's side of the family. So now my kids don't just have this whole like Midwestern side. Now we also have a whole Korean side of the family living in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And that's also like a whole new culture and thing to talk about. And it's part of their identity as well. Cause like up until now, you know, they were like, okay, we're half Moroccan. My husband's Moroccan. And then we're like, you know, a little bit, a quarter Korean, a quarter English, whatever. And then they have this whole big story in the middle. And it's something we talk about and we joke about, and it's just there. I think that the one thing I think I personally felt like I should hide it from my kids. And actually I went to Rabbi Leib Kellerman. Mm-hmm. One of my kids was maybe like 3 or 4. And I asked him and he said, no, like, you have to tell your kids the truth. But I had been so conditioned to think that like your kids can only thrive from society if you look like everybody else. And so I thought, like, how am I going to, like, what am I going to do? Like, how do I deal with my parents? Like, I didn't even know. And Rabbi Kellerman was like, of course, you're going to, you know, this is part of your life. And so that was good advice as well.
So your family was in LA. Your mom's family, you decided to move to LA when you wanted to do the whole conversion. Were you, now looking back, were you like living really close by to them and you didn't even know it all that time?
Yeah.
Is that the craziest thing?
Yeah. I think that for me, like, LA is a place of like transformation in my head, which just sounds maybe kind of funny, but like, that's where my mom died. That's where my mom brought over her family from Korea, and she helped them come from Korea and become, you know, successful and bring their kids in, like their kids were born there, but to raise their families in America, not in the poverty that was what they had known in South Korea. And then that was where my conversion took place. And then that is also where I reconnected with myself when I went back to meet my family after that DNA test. So I have like very good memories of Los Angeles, and Hashem for some reason decided that he's going to put all my major life events right there. Like, that's also where I got married, you know?
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's so unbelievable when you look at it, like, from that standpoint, isn't it unbelievable when you just look back like that?
When you look back, you're like, there's a plan here. I don't get it. But like, I'm going along with it.
Wow, that's unbelievable. So now that you're part of the Jewish community, do you see like you have like, do you feel like a purpose, a role that you have to give over to the community?
So, you know, I think that a huge thing that I worked on in the last 5 years is, you know, when I wanted to find my biological family, and I also wanted to like answer the questions or kind of meet the uneasiness that I was feeling, and, you know, the next stage of growth, right? Sometimes we feel that uneasiness when it's time to grow. Yeah. I went to therapy and I did work outside of therapy. I journaled and I really thought about the process, and I really decided that I'm going to take responsibility for my life, and I'm not the victim of this story, you know, of my dad putting us in foster care. And I never really felt like the victim, but maybe it could show up in small ways. And I became super accountable to myself and using the world as a mirror and seeing, how do I take what I see outside and realize it is not about them, but it is about a path back to myself. And so I do think that part of my purpose, you know, I think is as a clinical nutritionist. I believe passionately in nutritional biochemistry and helping educate people how they can just feel amazing in their bodies so they can do their tafkid and they're not worrying about trends and diets for the rest of their life. Yeah. I think the other aspect is I always want to highlight when I speak to groups and teenagers that it's very hard to grow up without roots. I often think that we find we live in the Cholent pot, like we live so close together and we know people and there's Jewish geography, and sometimes it can almost feel like too much if you grew up and everybody knows everybody and you've got so many obligations to family. But having lived on the complete other side without Masorah, without roots, and really not knowing anything, it's a really uncentered place to be. And I've always, thank God, I feel like I've always managed and succeeded. When I met my Korean family, there was a level of just like internal calm that I was like, oh, I bet other people have this all the time. And so I think that as much as sometimes like the halacha and the obligations and everything that comes with this lifestyle can feel like a lot, having come from the other side, that doesn't feel better. And so really, I think just for me, just reminding people that it's very special, it's unique. And the other thing is, looking now, I never thought growing up that I would actually see anti-Semitism. I remember studying World War II in my AP history class and learning about everything that happened and the Holocaust. I never actually thought that I would see the things that I see written online, see the things that I see on the media. I never imagined that this was something that would continue to pop up. And so I think that in trying to understand it, at the end of the day, there's many reasons, whatever, for anti-Semitism, however people, whatever it's whether they're raised that way or they're, whatever it is. But I do think that some of it comes down to the fact that a lot of anti-Semitism stems from jealousy. There is no pedagogical method that will teach the level of community and the ability to pass down Masorah over thousands of years like Judaism. And so I think that when you see that anti-Semitism, it's a jealousy of the fact that we've been able to come together as a nation over and over through hardship, sometimes not even liking each other, and not only come together, but also to pass down a specific set of traditions. That's a sociological achievement.
Yes, it is.
And it's unique. And so it's our job to facilitate that. Facilitate that
Beautiful.
passing down and to facilitate that connection between people and help people feel integrated, whether they chose to integrate or they were born into it.
Okay. If you don't want to talk about it, it's okay. But I've picked up when I was listening to you that a few times you said you reconnected to your mother's family.
Yeah.
Did you ever reconnect to your father's family?
I have reconnected to my father and his family. I probably need a few more years of therapy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it was a positive experience in that it added another layer of understanding to myself. And I think it's still ongoing. And that's the great part about being in this space of taking responsibility and not blaming him, but really seeing how I'm meant to show up in the world with the information that I have.
Wow. Oh, so good for you. Very strong woman. That friend that you lived with right before college, are you still in touch with her?
I'm not. She actually, when I got married, she was at Hebrew Union College. I think she was studying rabbinical studies and maybe cantor. She was a singer. We lost touch after maybe, I was living a very Orthodox lifestyle. I actually remember bringing her to a shul with me. And she was studying at the Hebrew Rabbinical College, which I think is Reform or Conservative. And then we were sitting in this shul where the women were way up at the top and couldn't see anything. I remember she came, we connected. She came over for a meal once. We lost touch after the first few years of marriage. But I really should Facebook find her and reach out.
Yeah, those are fun. Those Facebook findings are always fun. And it's so frustrating when you don't find them. It's like I said, how do you not have Facebook? It's you Google, you Facebook, where are you? If you're not there, you don't exist, right?
What's really funny is actually I, for years, did not have any social media until I started working in 2017. And I had nothing. I had a kosher phone. I love it. Having a kosher phone is the next, not by kosher, I mean a phone that only has text messaging, but doesn't have any internet access or social media access. It was the best feeling. I thrive for that feeling again. I strive for it. I have to go back to that feeling. But my friends from high school, finally, after I got online, they found me and they're like, where have you been for the last 15 years? I was like, oh, sorry. I just got on this whole social media thing because, but yeah, it's, I think that part of me, and I mean, almost tried to kind of close off the first part of my life. And I don't think that's uncommon with converts. I don't think I'm the only person that's had that from what I understand. maybe it is, but I almost tried to kind of like contain it. And like, I had one good friend from college, my friend Barb, that I kept in touch with, and she would come to visit my kids, and she would dress sneeze when she was in my neighborhood because she wanted to be respectful. Like, she was so sweet. And she was like she knew everything kosher. And I had like that one good friendship because she was an amazing friend and she really worked hard to keep the friendship going. But a lot of friendships I let kind of like go to the side. And the truth is, the advice I would have given to my younger self, because I've reconnected with some of my friends from high school, is like, those friendships are important as well. And like, you can lead this Orthodox life and you can still have your old friends. It might be a little bit difficult, the language, the changes in kosher, and being able to hang out together and your change in values. But a lot of those friendships are still, like, one of my friends, a close friend of me and my brother's, we got together with my brother when we were in the States. And like, it was just like so good to see her. It just felt so good to see her and like hang out with her and my brother. And it just felt kind of like, just like such a nice reminiscent, like we're all now in our 40s and like, but it was just a nice catch up. And so I think that's the advice I would have given to my younger self during my conversion, is like, you don't have to close off your old life. Like, there's room for all of it here.
That's beautiful. I love how you put that. So there's a final question that I've asked everybody just for fun and like a little deep. I asked, we have 5 senses.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you think of your 5 senses is the strongest? And how does that play a role in your life and specifically your Jewish life?
Wow, it's interesting. Probably visual. I'm a very aesthetic person.
Okay.
To me, I feel extremely connected to Hashem when my surroundings are aesthetically pleasing, when I'm in a beautiful place, when I'm in a beautiful space in nature. Like, when I have that visual input, it's centering, it's calming, and it connects me to like this sense of awe. So I spend a lot of time, I will drive to the beach at 5 a.m., an hour away from my house, to sit for 20 minutes on the beach and stare at the ocean to get back in time before my kids wake up. My husband can go to shul. I need that, whether it's nature or whether it's just art. I was an art history major before I went into sciences. So I love that. I love that aesthetic. And it really connects me with like something way bigger and something way more creative. And at the end of the day, I think, to be made B'Tselem Elokim is really to be a creator, right? What are we creating in our own lives? What stimulates us to want to create? And for me, it's aesthetic. It's a beautiful aesthetic, whether it's nature or, just even being in like a beautiful hotel lobby, I can get pretty excited.
That's so cute. I love this. I love this conversation. Thank you, Nomi, for taking the time to sit and answer some of my crazy questions. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
And I hopefully we'll be together soon.
We will.
And your Shabbos invitation is always open. I know that.
100%. I'm waiting for you guys. You haven't come yet.
Okay, we'll get there. We'll get there. Thank you, Nomi.
Thanks, Jordana.
Okay.